My name is Olka Joshi-Hansen. I'm a co-interim executive director here at Grantmakers for Education and also our chief program officer. Want to welcome you today to our webinar on capturing what matters, redefining student assessment for lifelong success. We are super excited to have a great panel today to talk about a really interesting initiative that's been going on in Australia, the development of a student learning credential that's being used at the university level as well as for employers, and really shifting how students and employers and higher ed institutions are able to see and assess student learning. So our panel today, if we can move to the next slide, is Elliot Washer with Big Picture Learning in the US, Dr. Andrea Purcell, also with Big Picture Learning in the US, Dr. Bo Johan Thompson, who's with the Lego Foundation, and Viv White, who is with Big Picture Learning Australia. So without further ado, I want to bring our panelists up to screen, and we're going to start. Off with Elliot. But the big piece here, the big framing piece, is that we know that learning happens everywhere, not just inside the walls of schools. And as in the U.S., we're having conversations about what education looks like moving forward, how we do a better job of recognizing all the ways, all the places, and all the people with whom young people are learning. We really need to be thinking differently about how we credential and assess learning. And so we're excited to hear from you. Elliot, would love it if you could kick us off a little bit, setting the context both for Big Picture Learning as well as this work.
Sure thing. Thanks, Olka, for having us all today. I'm at the ASU GSV conference right now, so it's a little bit noisy if people are walking by, so please excuse that. But basically, what taking off on what Olka was saying is that for 50, 70 years in the United States and around the world, we've struggled with assessment because of a not very clear picture of who each and every young person is, very heavily relying on standardized testing. And there's been lots of work in portfolio assessment and exhibitions, but up until this point, in a lot of ways, nobody's really figured out how to take a look at that and vet and warrant the work. So each and every school isn't at it by itself. We're all in this alone, if you will. And our colleagues in Australia, Viv White, who's executive director in Australia, formed a partnership with the University of Melbourne. And they figured out how to take teacher judgment, student self-assessment, and mentor judgment, i.e. learning happening in and outside of school, credit it and warrant it and vet it through the university and their psychometricians, working closely with them. And we've taken that work, which was funded by the Lego Foundation, thank you both, and brought it to the United States in Washington, California, and New York State so far. Viv has been doing this work for 3 or 4 years. They have very good third-party research. They're connected to the University of Melbourne. Andrea Purcell is the director of this work for Big Picture Learning in the United States. And I've been working closely with Viv on trying to make this happen. But really, this work started with her group. And I feel, after all these many years that I've been around, that this is actually groundbreaking work for all of us and adds to the general milieu around how to figure out not just how smart you are to test, but how you are smart, which opens up university admissions, service, trade work to women, people of color, around race, class, and gender in a variety of different ways. So I'll stop there. I'm just kind of laying the groundwork, Viv has done incredible work with her colleagues there and with the University of Melbourne people. And Andrea's doing incredible work in the United States. And I'm going to put myself on mute and get out of the way.
Thank you, Elliot. Viv, it would be great if you would give us a sense of what it is that we're talking about today, sharing a little bit about the origins and the credential as it's now living and being experienced by a lot of folks in Australia.
Well, hello, everybody, and thank you for inviting me and having the time to come and listen to our pretty amazing story, which really begins many years ago when I first met Ted Sizer. And I just want to acknowledge the incredible work of Ted Sizer in thinking about how we can reform the American high school. And I learned here in Australia that our schools were much like yours and we needed reforming too. Through Ted, I met the wonderful Dennis and Elliot, Dennis Litke and Elliot Washaw from Big Picture America. And after their beginnings in 1996, in 2006, we began our work here in Australia. The greatest gift that they gave us was the learning design of Big Picture learning. And I'll share a little bit of the design for those of you who are not so familiar with it in a minute. But the brief history of you can put the slides up if you like, Jess, I'm not going to go through all these words, just so you've got them in front of you if you need to refer to them. Well, we began the venture, or adventure probably, more to the point, in 2006, and we just started Big Picture. Elliot's advice was go fast, take the lot and get on with it, really. And we did that. We thought we'd have one school by 2009, and now we have 55 schools here in Australia. And as I understand it, we're up over the 200s, 300s in the world, including places like Barbados and Kenya. By the time 2016 came around, though, I was confronted by three wonderful young people who we gave them agency through the design, and they decided to take it, which we were very pleased about, but incredibly challenged. They said, we do not want to do, in their own words, quite colloquially as teenagers can, said, we don't want to do those stupid tests to finish high school. We want you, Viv, to create a test that's more consistent with the principles of the Big Picture design. So let's go to the design, which is slide 4. Thanks, Jess. I'll just skip to that. And the Big Picture design is fundamentally around student interests, their relationship they have both in the school and outside the school, with mentors in universities, mentors in employment, mentors in cultural institutions, mentors in the broad community, not simply a work placement. And those young people pursue their interests both inside of school and outside of school. Now, Sophie decided she wanted to be a physiotherapist. That was one of the three. We call them the 3 starters. And David, who was one of 9 Aboriginal children in the urban settings here in Australia, decided he wanted to be a doctor. And Hamish decided to be a lawyer. Now, these young working class kids from the suburbs of Sydney were very, very low income kids, particularly David, who'd already failed science and maths in 7 and 8 and was streamed to be a tradesperson, which he, not that being a tradesperson is an inappropriate pathway, or far be it, but he decided to be a butcher. But he hurt his back and he found himself in hospital, and he looked around and he said, this is my place. He's now he's now in his senior years of medicine at the University of Newcastle and coaching other young people in the study of medicine. So we're very proud of him. Flip to the next design slide, please, Jess. And the other young people, Hamish is now a practicing lawyer and Sophie's working in the world of sports science. So what young people do in the design, if you're not quite familiar with it, we really flip what we call here in Australia the grammar of schooling. So we flip the way we teach, the way the young people learn, the way the school is organised in the day. So it's split between in-school work and out in the community work. And the last flip we were challenged to do in 2016 was flip the assessment. Now, we, like you in America, have incredibly rigid frameworks by boards of studies, state legislature, compulsorily having to do this thing like the SAT that we call the ATAR to get anywhere in university world. And we had to completely ignore all of that. So my sleepless nights were, will the boards of studies catch me as I run with this, this idea of ignoring all of that policy and all of the rules and regulations and see if we could do it under their noses to the point where it was too late for them to chase me. And we've managed to achieve that through this process. Thank you. Let's flip to the next slide and I'll get to the credential. So what we did, we started off with these 3 young people in 2016, and we went to one university, the University of Newcastle, and I met with the Vice Chancellor. I just knocked on the door and explained about these 3 young people and their aspirations to come to their university. And you know what was really interesting for me? It was a 5-minute sell. It only took 5 minutes for the Vice Chancellor. Thank heavens, she said, thank heavens. We have such a random and unfair selection process in all of our universities here in Australia. Much of it grace and favour. Some of it principals sign off to say, please take this student, to very, very shonky, I think that's probably a universal word, shonky applications, and they were not getting the students that they wanted either. And so this SAT test, or the ATAR as we call it, what does 96 mean? What does 82 mean? It doesn't mean anything to anybody really. And so we're witnessing, since those early days, a crumbling of the regime for acceptance into university. We're now at the point where that SAT test is only used by 19% of the students who leave year 12 to go to university. So the whole apparatus is coming apart before our eyes, and we have been really well placed to actually use this new credential. Thanks for the translation, Orca. You know, the shonky washing machine, the one that doesn't work. And anyway, so we began, and the first phase of the work was drawing on Elliot's earlier work around digital portfolios, because Elliot helped us launch Big Picture in Australia, because I'd met him many, many years ago when he was at Brown University with Ted. You know, digital portfolios, gathering student work, putting them in a folder. And so we did that to start. And then, of course, the university started to take these digital folders. But it became apparent to myself, to me in particular, because I was leading this work, that those kids got in using those portfolios. I think I've just frozen now, Orca. I'll just keep talking. Oh, there we go. I'm back again. The universities took these portfolios, but it was getting ridiculous because the portfolios were this big, fat, you know, big folders of work. And we knew we couldn't scale it nationally or internationally by doing it that way. So I serendipitously met with an old friend of mine who was a professor of psychometrics and assessment at Melbourne University, Sandra Milliken. And she said, how are you going to scale this thing? And I said, not sure. Have you got any ideas? She said, well, no, but together I think we might be able to have a crack at it. So what we've done, we worked with our own students. Now, not the 3 students. We've now, by this stage, in 2019, I think we've got about 30 schools. And we work with our students and our teachers on the students' work that was in front of them. And we work with the psychometricians. Now, the really important breakthrough for us all was to recognise that there were no psychometric algorithms that were going to do the job of the personalising of the credential, as Elliot says, how you are smart, not compared to others, just how you are smart. They didn't have the capacity, the algorithmic capacity. So they had to think a whole new way as psychometricians, along with us thinking about a whole new way of learning. So this is sort of where we've arrived at, and we're now in the final year of what we call the warranting process, where if you notice on the screen down the bottom, there's a little animated picture of a young woman, and you'll see this flower. There's 6 petals on the flower. Now, the petals are representations of the learning goals. Now, that was the second big gift that Elliot and Dennis gave us. Rather than looking at the curriculum, that maths, English, science, French, German, we knew that if we were asking students what they're passionate about, it's not always on the curriculum. And if it is, it's often at a very low level. So if you've got a young person who's interested in artificial intelligence, as we're all very familiar with now, there wouldn't have been, it wasn't in the science curriculum when we started. So these learning goals, quantitative, empirical, social, reasoning, communication, personal qualities, which are in some ways, people refer to them as the soft skills. I call them the difficult skills to obtain. And the final one, knowing how to learn, which was a breakthrough for us. How do you actually understand how young people learn? Those goals are measured 4 times over 2 years in 11 and 12. By looking at the student work, the teachers make the judgment, the teachers punch it into the computer, and they punch it into the computer, and then up pops the flower after all of the algorithmic, stuff that goes on behind the scenes. Kristen, what are the 6 learning goals? Quantitative, social, empirical reasoning, communication in all forms, art, music, all that, knowing how to learn, and personal qualities. So those 6 goals, you can see on the screen, there are assessment frames that match the colours of the petals. And the teachers use those assessment frames over those 4 assessment periods in 11 and 12, to judge the kids, and then the flower produces where they're up to. So if you look at the example one, the yellow is empirical reasoning. That kid's not as strong in empirical reasoning as they are in knowing how to learn, which is the orange. Or pink is communication. So that young person has done a different suite of studies to achieve her goals. Now, what then happens, and we think is more important at one level, because we're still stuck in the world of statistics, even though it's on the really, really clever and creative edge of that work internationally. No other credential does this in the world. The most important part at one level is the attached credential. Can we go to the next slide? Thanks, Jess, because I'm going to show a credential. In a minute, I'll get you to press the video. The most important part of the credential is the actual, if you see on Abby's screen here, that's her front page. There's an online portfolio, and she has a video profile. Now, we get the flower, assessment by the frames, and then we get her curated portfolio. So while young people are at school, from right back for year 7 to year 12, they're collecting evidence and story about who they are as learners at what time of their career at school it involves. Now, on that online portfolio, including the video portfolio, is a sample of all of her selected work that she would want to share. And it can be in video data, sound only files, multimedia. Now, what the universities, of which we have 20 now, who take our kids using this portfolio as an entry marker, what the academics at the university who sit around a panel and look at this work say, the video is the one that's the kicker, the winner. You see the young person, like you're seeing me now, you'll be making some assessments about me, just talking to you. You'll make judgments about my performance. Some of you will want to see me again, and some may never want to see me again. But you can make an assessment so much more richly through the young people's world. So I'm going to finish there. And if Elliot, you think I've missed anything that you think the American audience or Orca might want to hear, I'm happy to keep going, but I don't think I need to. What I want to just show you now, Jess, in a minute, if you could play the video. This is us.
Viv?
Yeah, Elliot?
Yeah, one second. Two things. One, just to simplify the learning goals, they're applied academics, and they're academics that could be credited both in and outside of school. And the other thing is that we are now doing that work both in Australia and the United States, K-8, K-12. So I just wanted to make those 2 points.
Thank you. Good.
Okay.
Excellent. Fantastic. So this young person, and I, you know, just very quickly before we play the video, we have 200 young people like Abby now doing this credential for work, further study, and university and college. So all bar about 3% of our young people in Australia are from low-income families, Indigenous families, and multicultural families, refugees, etc. And we've got schools in the, those of you who know anything about the Indigenous world of Australia, we've got schools in the Narrandjara lands, which are literally 5 hours flying west of Alice Springs and 4 hours north of Perth. So it's a long way, and they're entirely Indigenous communities. One of the communities is the last community to come to white contact in 1986. So we have a capacity to use this credential in all sorts of settings. Abby's probably atypical, but it was the quickest one we could get uploaded for you today. So Abby is a daughter of a teacher who invested in the big picture design himself as, well, principal actually. He just loved the work, and his own child his 2 children now have gone through our school. So maybe if you could just play a little bit of this, and then I'll stop. But thanks for listening. And if there are any questions that I can answer, again, it's a short period of time to explain such a wonderful journey. And again, I thank you, Elliot, for the opportunity. And I sort of say, you gave us the gift of the design. This is our turn to pay back. Thank you. It's all yours.
Why don't we move on for now? And we will make sure, for those of you who are on the call, that we include the PowerPoint with the videos on the webinar recording. So thank you, Viv. That was super helpful. And I want to move to you, Andrea, because I think we have a lot in the US that we can learn from our friends around the globe that are doing work, but would really love it if you could bring us back into the US and give us a sense of what's happening here and where we are sort of in relationship to where we could be.
Sure. I want to, I think, start by elevating a few things that have already been said, because I think it's important to recognize this as a progressive. The IBPLC that they've been developing in Australia is relatively, I mean, it's within 5 to 6 years in development, but the actual work, the student experience, and our understanding of how the big picture model and learning design actually promotes preparation for students post-secondary, whether they go into the workforce or into the university, is not new. So we have longitudinal studies, and we have evidence that shows already that the kind of experiences that students have in our schools leads to successful and productive engagement in areas of interest post-secondary. So this assessment piece is an incredibly valuable tool that helps bring that together to have an external facing way of being able to show folks the robust complexity of the big picture learning experience. You started us, Olka, by talking about that we know as a collective that learning happens everywhere, both in and out of school. That's a really relevant point to this credential and into the work that we do. And Elliot was talking about how we have always looked for the ways that we know youth are smart. And there's lots of ways of demonstrating that current assessment tools and current evaluation tools don't ask the right questions in order for students to be able to demonstrate all of the things that they can do, their capacity, their strength, and how they're smart. And then Viv is highlighting, of course, what is core to all of this, which is the learning design, the actual youth experience. So the assessment tool is part of all of that understanding, and you can't separate one from the other. They're all sort of an integral system. It's important, I think, to be able to say that. The assessment system, however, cannot be undervalued. Like in the US context, and I'll go into the details of what we're doing in just a second, but assessment is a high stakes game, and it it allows flow of funding. It allows access for both schools, communities, and students into all different kinds of opportunities. And it also prevents those things from happening. So if you're not participating in the right or the sanctioned or the mandated assessment systems, you really are potentially taking a risk of not being able to access lots of opportunities and participate post-secondary and be prepared for it. So the assessment system, I think that we talk about in the IBPLC, it's a bi-directional impact. It impacts the actual experience of students and the teachers and how they construct the experience in school, because it's giving them that sort of goalpost of like, here are the things that we're working towards. We're working towards the big picture learning goals. We're working towards sort of the construction of these kinds of experiences and documenting these experiences. We're putting our money on these things, and we're asking you to document them, and we're asking you to make evaluations and assessments on them. But then there's the other side of that, the external facing value of the assessment systems, and how we can construct an assessment system that allows student access to all of the things that they want to access post-secondary. So when Viv was talking about portfolios, my first work in education was as a classroom teacher, and we had portfolios, those 3.5-inch binders that maybe a lot of people remember, and they were full of examples and evidence of robust, complex student learning. And no one besides the student and me as their advisor could actually deal with the volume of evidence that was in there in a digestible way. So it was a rich sort of experiential exercise to construct a portfolio, and it really had very limited external facing value because there were very few folks who could actually sort through and process and know what to make of that. So what the IBPLC has really done and what offers us is both. It's a way for us to capture the real complexity of in-school, out-of-school, interest-based learning that's very personalized for students, but it also presents us with a way to be able to present it to folks who want to know about that, for them to be able to digest, sometimes in a snapshot, but then of course you can go deeper if you want. So because we work very closely as a big picture network internationally, and we saw all of this fantastic work that Viv and her team were doing in Australia, and just had that moment of, well, we need this too in our schools in the US. This is value added to the US. So about 2 years ago, we started a pilot. And I'll say this here, we're very appreciative, Bo, for the support to be able to do this. This pilot work is really critical because the work that's been done in Australia in partnership with the University of Melbourne now has evolved to having this external facing value. And so we're able to develop a sustainable financial model where schools and districts and folks can pay into that. We're not there yet in the US. We're still in this pilot stage. And so we need that kind of support to be able to develop a critical cohort of work, to be able to engage in conversations with US universities and districts and that sort of thing, in order to implement the financially sustainable model that Viv is helping us develop and that they're working on in Australia as well. So thank you for that support. It's been really important. But what we started 2 years ago, and we're on a very similar timeline trajectory. We've learned a lot from our colleagues in Australia. We're on a very similar timeline as they are. In the 2021-22 school year, we began with a first-year pilot, 7 schools in 3 states, Washington, California, and New York in the United States, and about 50 youth engaged in IBPLC work. And when I say that, we were training school staff to be able to understand the IBPLC, the frames, how to engage with the moderations and the assessments. They were talking about their practice and how it was influenced by all of this conversation. That initial cohort of students, because the actual logistics for receiving a full credential is it's a 2-year process, 3 to 4 moderation cycles or evaluation cycles. So that first cohort of pilot students will be receiving the first credential this May or June. So we'll have our first US students, yes, it's super exciting, who've received a full credential. So we have that first critical cohort to sort of open conversations with universities and employers and sort of external facing folks post-secondary. so much enthusiasm, both at the school sites who were in year one and people who are hearing about this. We had our year two pilot in the US, which is this school year, the 22-23 school year. We've expanded to 4 states. So Washington, California, New York, and now Massachusetts. And we have 12 schools who are engaged and 150 students who are in their first year moderation cycles. So you can see how we're growing. This year we'll have 50 who have the credential. Next year, we may have as many as 150 who are receiving the credential, which starts creating a critical mass for us to be able to engage in proof points and examination and of all of this work. So that's where we're at. And we have a ton of enthusiasm. I know I'm not overstating by saying that if we could have between 500 and 1,000 students engaged very quickly, either by next year or the following year after that. And I see that Elliot's going to give us some updates on some other US progress, but just to quickly mention, we are engaged in conversations with US universities, which Elliot's going to give us an update on. We are also engaged with Australia and with our US schools who are doing this work in building an articulation of the IBPLC for the K-12 spectrum. So right now we've got things articulated for grades 11 and 12, but we know that it's a progressive. So if we can start with students as young as kindergarten, engaging with the learning goals and engaging with this kind of documentation and being able to articulate their strengths in that way, we can only imagine the kind of presentation they're going to have by the time they're seniors. So Elliot, did you want to talk about university partnerships a bit before we get to questions?
Yeah, I'll say a few things. So I'm at ASU GSV right now. I did meet with the Dean of Education at ASU. I've met with the COO at ASU, and I actually had a little encounter with the president of ASU. And all of them want to start a very serious conversation with the University of Melbourne around a partnership. So we figure out how to engage in the vetting and warranting process that Uni Melbourne and Viv have developed there. And so where it lives and how it gets done is something to be figured out. But we have, I think, potentially a very good partner, and a partner that has multiple schools and tens of thousands of students online. And they are very innovative and enterprising. So, you know, we may be small and mighty, but they're big and mighty, which is a very big difference. So I'm excited about that conversation, which is going to happen probably in the next few weeks. And we also, as Andrea points out, we have a pipeline where we've introduced the credential to lots and lots of teachers and lots of students in their schools. So it's, yes, there's the in-depth deep work, but there's also the work of getting the word out and people getting their involved in it.
That's great. Thank you. So Eric, thank you for Eric, thanks for your comment. Just that this is a little bit general. So I'm gonna, if we can, Viv, unless this goes along with it, but I'm gonna ask if we can play that video because I think it will be helpful to sort of help
the explainer, not Abby's.
Not Abby's. Oh, okay.
No, play Abby's, that's fine. But before you do, there was another question there around how the students faring once they get to university. We've done like good innovators do. We've done a research project on that and continuing to do that. 95% of the kids go to the course of their choice in the university of their choice. So we have our Sandstone Ivy League universities that they go to. They go to local regional universities, but they're particularly interestingly choosing a course rather than a uni. So the kids who are interested in marine biology go to Tasmania no matter where they live, because that's where the best marine biology degree is. And what they're doing, they choose their course and they stay the course in that course. That's the bit that's really interesting for us. They're not flip-flopping. They've already got their passion and their interest, They've worked out a post-school project that takes them to the universities to research the work that they're going to do. And we're really chuffed about that. And so is the university. So it's very important. But this Abby video is, yeah, like it gives you a really good idea. She's now in year 2 physiotherapy just as an example.
And can I ask, just as a follow-up to that, Viv, while Jessie pulls up the video, so if they have to then do traditional testing, right? Or are they managing to do that?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, because most of our kids score 6 out of 6 on knowing how to learn, and they know how to learn how to do crappy exams as well, you know. So they're really, so I'm a very colloquial working class woman. You probably picked that up already. The tests and assessments, in fact, some of the universities are really exploring very diverse forms of assessment, at least here. But in the main, they do their tests and they do well in some and not in others, and they get better at it as they go on. But they're principally not, they're doing very well. They just know how to do them. No, you've got to do some stuff you don't like doing in order to get where you want to go.
Great. Thank you. So Jessie, do you want to play the video just so folks can get a sense?
My name's Abby Lation and I'm a big picture student at Hunter Sports High School. I've been in the program since year 9 and have been studying all things physiotherapy related. I come from a very sporty family, so sports have been part of my life from a very young age. My first love was athletics, and I was a very dedicated sprinter who loved training and even became quite successful at a young age. During this time I did netball in the off season to keep up fitness and also just be exposed to a team environment. But now I love netball and it's sort of become my passion, so at the moment I'm on a pathway to be identified, hopefully. Due to my heavy training schedule and competitions, I suffered an injury quite early on, which exposed me to physiotherapy. This is the first time I sort of was aware of what a physio was and what they did, and pretty much right there I made up my mind that that's what I wanted to do one day. One of my strengths as a student is that I'm always motivated to further my knowledge. I just love research, and I guess you could say I want to know it all. I also know how important it is to make connections with others, so I really tried to not only connect with people of my own age but also mentors in the field of my interests, such as other physios. With all the challenges I've had to face throughout high school, I've had to adapt a lot, so being adaptable is one of my other strengths that have come into play in the more recent years. Leadership has also been a big part of my life. So far, I've captained many sporting teams everywhere from New South Wales athletics team that travelled to New Zealand to some of my rep netball teams and just like my local school house captain. I was also recently awarded some pretty cool awards, one being the High Achiever Award, which is the highest achievement in academics and sporting combined, as well as being the joint award recipient for the Vivian White Big Picture of Excellence Award at our recent graduation. Throughout high school, the class of 2020 and myself had faced many challenges, including for Hunter Sports we had a total school construction that spanned over many years, and even more recently the global pandemic. Being able to adapt during these phases was really important, because if I wasn't willing to adapt, I don't think I would have been able to get through it. I'm really glad I chose Big Picture. I first found out about it through my dad, who at the time was a deputy of a high school and started it at his own, he started his own academy. So he had gone down to Canberra for a conference with a whole heap of other Big Picture teachers from around Australia, and just listening to success stories that he came back with, I knew that's what I wanted to do. At the time, I was in the middle of year 9 and I began to feel a little lost, just because I already knew what I wanted to do, and I just found some subjects pointless as they didn't really go towards my end goal. So I dreamed Big Picture, and with the main goal of graduating portfolio into the Bachelor of Physiotherapy at the University of Newcastle. One of the best parts about Big Picture and what's distinctive about me in regards to being a physiotherapist is that I actually already work at a physiotherapy clinic. I work at Sharps Physio, which I originally started out as an LTI and then was offered a job as a junior receptionist. So that's something that's really cool, considering I have all these mentors surrounding me that I work with that can help me through the process. At the moment, my goal is to further my netball career as far as I can while studying to be a physiotherapist, and once I graduate I'd love to be able to work.
Great. Thank you so much. So Viv, I'm curious, if we had kept going, where would be the place in the portfolio where folks would be able to see evidence of her learning, for example?
Well, if you go back to the very front of her video, just the slide where the link is. Part of the problem with all of this work is so rich. So later on, the audience can have a look by clicking on that online portfolio badge there. See the online portfolio? If you click on the second one, the online portfolio, that might access some of it. Okay.
So people can take a look, because I think that might have been one of the questions.
Yeah, exactly.
Eric was asking. Great.
But her flower was 6 out of 6 out of 6 out of 6 out of 6. For all, oh no, the empirical reasoning, which is interesting for me. The empirical reasoning is a 5, but that's at about level 2 of a university degree, second year of university. So the 6 out of 6 score on this floral arrangement, we call it, is a high level 2. You know, they've done senior thesis work, they've done autobiographies, they've done major research projects. And you can see on her assessment there, it explains what she's done in each of those learning goals. So every student's front page like this explains where they get to if they're at this level. So knowing how to learn, for instance, students at this level are open to ideas that challenge their current thinking and action, and they pursue new knowledge to develop improved solutions.
That's good. All right, thank you. So I want to keep the questions coming for those of you in the audience. Bo, I want to just pull you into the conversation here, because as a funder, right, we've heard from Viv, we've heard from Andrea that it was just super important to have the initial funding that allowed for the development of a sustainable model. So, you know, why has LEGO chosen to invest in this work? How is it moving forward some of the priorities that you have?
Absolutely. And thank you for the invitation and for this amazing story. I'm very confident that you are not overstating the impact that this can have. So I oversee our global research partnerships, and I've also been in US for a few years to build our US strategy and strengthening our partnerships. And we believe there's a fundamental need to reimagining learning based on an excitement for learning new things to help students tackle the most difficult challenges in society, and why they still feel they're part of a community where they can belong. And we have been part of many international initiatives across more than 60 countries. And some of the challenges we face is there's not really a lot of good ways to document and recognize students' experiences, real life experiences, and make them recognized for how they develop skills and academic success. So when we have looked at our strategies over the past decade, we have moved from traditional philanthropy to program areas, and now to more addressing underlying systems change, the systems that underpin how children and students develop and learn. And one of the main systems to influence is about assessments. So we have identified that the main lever to change things is, you know, dealing with the main purpose of education. It's how we measure and reward particular kinds of outcomes to be more balanced, more relevant than the traditional standardized sterile forms of assessment. So when Elliot came to us and we talked about the experiences that students have at the Big Picture Learning Schools, we saw an opportunity to capture all of this in this new types of assessment and this tool. So what it brings to us is a much more personalized form of assessments. So students can really demonstrate their strengths and their interest and the specific skills they develop. It's also very real life practical projects that are relevant and meaningful to the students that they use as a starting point. And it's not a competitive form of assessments. It's a medium for discussions, a platform for collaboration. And we need investments in these much more authentic forms of portfolios, which demonstrates who students really are and help them become accredited and take seriously as an entry point, not only to higher education, but as a wallet, as something they can demonstrate to work and community that they have done as a meaningful activity. So what it does for us is it helps us reach many more students, because we work on the principles that keep existing systems in place, the systems that are used to define quality, and that is to redefine the assessments. We also invest in this because we can learn much more from these kinds of effort, and we can use our knowledge as a partner. And we invest because it brings much more knowledge and more examples in place, which catalyzes opportunities for others. So this is a system for others to use. So when we have these types of assessments and credentials in place, it's something that unlock the unhealthy pieces of our system, where we don't favor real life, authentic, practical experiences and well-being. So we believe this is an excellent illustration of this purpose of reimagining education. On the one hand, it's an innovative tool for assessment. On the other hand, it's a practical demonstration of real life stories of what students are capable of doing. And maybe it's a little bit like a Lego system of play. It's a creative platform where each individual can express their unique ideas and to be smart in their own ways. And there's not a lot of examples like this. So we believe this embodied similar principles in the international big picture learning credential. So we hope that that's an example that many more would be interested in.
I want to read a couple of the comments and questions because folks who are on the video afterwards won't be able to see them. So Eric, you said it would seem that students knowing they'll produce this kind of a video and portfolio might be more highly motivated to participate in projects and extracurricular activities, which is a great thing. I think that's probably true. There was a question, you had a question about what degree is the video's impact determined by the quality and professionalism of the video production rather than the content itself?
The clear answer to that is Abby loved making videos. So that was one of her passions. We've got ranging all sorts of different styles of videos, but now what we do as part of our work, and I put it in the chat, we actually have training materials for the students that have been developed by one of the schools that's got really good at it. And so we've got training materials on how to build the portfolio, how to do your video, and tips for doing videos, for instance. And we also have a suite of materials that we were able, interestingly, we didn't think they'd be usable in a way in America because of the different cultural context we're in, but our materials have just transferred really, really well to Kenya, to Canada, to wherever it's going. And we just continually produce materials to support people. But look, one of our young boys, just as an example, and we didn't have permissions for this one to be shown, but he's really interested in Australia, the South Pacifica and Lebanese young Arabic kids. They love the shaves of the hair, they cut bits of their hair and they do all of this. Well, he wanted to be a barber, and his whole video is showing his various inventive styles that he's worked on for his credential. So it ranges from Abby's to Naheem's and all sorts of different approaches with kids. It doesn't seem to matter just how schmick or slick it is. It's just who they are. And we want to leave it at that. We don't want to make Abby type videos for all kids. That's just her.
Bo, I appreciate you sort of naming, right, that there are these system and structural kind of pieces that prevent schools that are doing really interesting work from, I think some people would use the word scaling, but I would say from sort of becoming a more dominant phase because they're not able to show everything they know they are doing with and for students. I want to go back, Andrea and Viv, to something you said in terms of the students. So we know that there are biases in our current forms of assessment, cultural biases and so I'd love you to just kind of talk a little bit more about how this approach to credentialing learning and students being able to demonstrate their learning helps funders who are interested and concerned, right, about really serving students who haven't been well served by the system historically.
Well, I'll just very quickly, this is the equity piece for me. My life has been working in low-income families and Indigenous and multicultural settings. And I knew and still know that Australia is the most low equity country in the world. But most people would not know that. The difference between how poor kids go in Australia to the rich kids in Australia is just shameful. It is absolutely shameful. And so that's what drove me to develop this program, this credential, that would acknowledge all of the human endeavours for all of our young people. So the majority, as I said, 95% of young people in our schools, it's different form of poverty in Australia. It's, you know, we often say we don't have your issues around race and gender and so on is largely within the African American, Native American communities. Here it's the Indigenous communities. You know, they're so incarcerated. It's just shameful, shameful. But this credential actually captures the knowledges of these people. And we are getting 100%, you know, 100 out of 100 of these young kids who want to go to uni get there. This is unheard of. And as you said, doing the actual profile and doing the actual work is highly motivating. They can't wait. Some of them want to start in Year 7 doing their videos. You know, that was really exciting.
Andrea, Andrea, how does this play out in the US? And what's your thoughts about how this fits into the US sets of conversations?
Yeah, I think it's a very important question. And it's one of the reasons that I like this evaluation system. I was writing some things in the chat, I think that I'll elaborate on. So one of the beautiful pieces of the IBPLC is that it really allows us to draw from a diversity of student experience as evidence for how they are smart. So for example, if we're talking in sort of the big bucket of communication, and one of the goals, I'm paraphrasing here, but one of the goals is to be able to effectively impact and communicate to an audience. So you think about all of the different skills that you need to be able, you need to know your audience, you need to understand how communication works. You might even need to use a different language, or if you're talking to an audience of peers versus an audience of folks like we have on this webinar, how are you shifting your presentation, your pitch, the way that you're communicating, the way that you're presenting yourself? And it's a very complex skill set to be able to do that. So when you're looking for how youth are able to do that currently, how are you effectively communicating your needs, your interests, your wants? You find that there's all different places where you can find evidence of that. How do you communicate with your peers? How do you communicate with your family? How do you communicate with me as an educator? When you get into our secondary students, how are you communicating with professionals in fields of interest to you? How are you communicating with college admissions directors? And because the framework of the IBPLC asks advisors, the people who know the students the best, to look for ways that they are successfully doing that communication and then build from that place to, okay, perhaps you're more effective in communicating with your peers than you are with a professional community, for example. How can we help develop that skill around your interest so that you can move forward? But sometimes that communication is through an email and it's in writing, and sometimes it's through a research paper, and other times it's by actually recognizing, listening, and documenting students in conversation with other folks. So because we can draw and document through this particular assessment tool from a diversity of evidence, it really allows us to be able to broaden the ways that students can show how they're smart. It's not creating a narrow lane saying you are only good if you can perform on this specific narrow measure that we've constructed. So that allows this to be very culturally responsive and allows us to be able to value things like bi or multilingualism, and all of those sort of unspoken, in this area of communication, for example, unspoken cues, like I know I need to go to talk to my auntie first before I address anybody else in my family, because she's actually the one who's going to be able to get me what I need, or allow me even to, to speak here. So yeah, it's an exciting aspect of this tool that Viv has as a proof point, and that's definitely playing out consistently in the US.
To reassure people around the standards question, the Melbourne University, actually, the warranting process allows them to analyse all of the data across the country and now across the world, to the point where they have produced documents that actually show that this certificate and its measurements are better than any external certificate that's currently been issued in Australia. So the standards have been warranted against national external standards. So they've done that work. But some of our young people, like Jarif, who was a Bangladeshi refugee, and he had terrible suicide ideation. We were lucky to keep him going, you know, every day. He was interested in tanks and war tanks. And we thought, he just did tanks for a year. And we thought, oh my goodness, how are we going to get this kid through? Anyway, in the end, he got through. He's now Australian National University, which is our international university here. And his 25,000 word thesis at the end of year 12 was on the relationship between China and Australia under times of COVID. So that got him through the door.
So I'm curious, because we only have a couple of minutes, but I'm curious, right, if this is something that funders are interested in piloting and sort of scaling up at some sort of a level in the US, like what is that going to take? What does it mean to kind of bring and begin this sort of work? Obviously, we have a different scale and scope and, you know, 10,000 times more universities, it feels like, than you do in Australia, but what would it take? And Bo, what do you see as the role of funders in kind of helping to move this kind of work forward? And then there was one other question from Jane who asked, can you share how admissions officers are using this data to make their decisions? Are students still submitting traditional transcripts, or are they translating the different petals into the more traditional GPA systems? So if we can end on those two questions, that would be great.
Yeah, I just add one thing. I just say that most or many of our partners are concerned that they can't document more innovative forms of learning, whether in school, out of school, at home, because they can't demonstrate the impact on the development, the skills, whether it's useful for academic progressions and so forth. So what this does is that you allow you to capture and document the things that students really care for, and use that as a mechanism into a discussion around quality and real life skills. So that's, if you have experiences and you don't really know how to document, this is a tool that people can use and support.
Excellent. In terms of the GPA, what each of our universities, 18, 20 of them, they all have their own way, in a way, of accounting. But what Melbourne has done is produce resources for them to look at that basically say, we at University of Melbourne, which is, you know, it's the top university in Australia, number one, that we, and Sandra Milliken is number one psychometrician in, some say in the world. I don't know about that, but you know, they guarantee that pedal, that level 6 pedal, is equivalent of a second-year university degree in the field of interest of the kid.
So it sounds like, and Andrea, in the chat you put, in Australia there's no double bookkeeping. So universities are considering these presentations for admissions using the IBPLC without additional transcripts.
Absolutely.
And that's ideally right where we'd want to get in the US. Well, I'm sure we could keep talking. And I wish we could. Sorry, Elliot?
No, that's correct. You're absolutely right in stating that. And when you have a university like ASU, and maybe others, but so they have that kind of credentialing power. It may be statewide, it may be national, but I feel that what we have here is something that other people are going to either, you know, stand on the shoulders of this work and innovate, or we will innovate through it and from it.
Great. Well, thank you all for your time. Thank you for just this really kind of insight into how this was developed and what it means. The one thing I will say, right, for those who are listening, is what you said, Andrea, which is you can't take this credential and parse it from the kind of education that we're describing, which is very much based around student interests, the kind of authentic work that they're doing. And so those two things go hand in hand in ways that I think we are hearing a lot more conversation about today. So thank you to those of us who joined. We will make this video available along with Viv's slides so that you'll be able to click on the links, and that should be available in about 1 week. And then we've got a few upcoming programs. On April 21st, we've got a Youth Voice Initiative share out and discussion. On the 25th next week, we're having the first in a series around playful learning, the what and why. And then on the 26th, we have Preventing Youth Homelessness series, identifying student risk through Project Upstream. So thank you for joining us. Thanks to our panelists, and have a great afternoon.